Mummy doesn't wake up all day crying girl calls 911. Cops discover horrific situation at her home. The emergency dispatch center fell silent as the small voice crackled through the speakers. Mummy. Mummy won't wake up the clock reads 7:43 p.m. when veteran dispatcher Sharon Williams leaned forward, her hand trembling slightly as she adjusted her headset. Hello, sweetheart. I'm here to help. Can you tell me your name? A muffled sob. Then I'm Maggie. I'm hungry, and Mummy's been sleeping all day. Through the static, Sharon detected something else, a peculiar metallic odor that seemed to seep through the connection. 5 years on the job had taught her that sometimes the things left unsaid spoke volumes. Maggie, brave girl, stay on the line. Help is coming. In the background, a dog's desperate barking pierced the night. Little did Officer Nancy Martinez know, as she rushed to her patrol car, that this call would unravel a web of secrets that would shake their quiet suburban community to its core. Officer Nancy Martinez stood at her precinct locker, fingers tracing the worn edges of a photo tucked inside her wedding day, 6 years ago. At 34, she'd built a reputation as one of the department's most dedicated officers, but beneath her polished badge lay a private struggle that even her closest colleagues knew nothing about. 3 miscarriages in 4 years had left invisible scars. The latest fertility specialist just last week had delivered the same clinical verdict: unexplained infertility. Nancy had nodded, maintaining the same composed demeanor she wore at crime scenes, while Jacob squeezed her hand under the desk. Her fellow officers knew her as the one who could coax statements from traumatized witnesses, who remembered the names of every street kid in their beat, who kept an extra stash of granola bars in her patrol car for the hungry ones. What they didn't know was how she lingered outside the elementary school during crossing guard duty, watching mothers adjust their children's backpacks with an ache she'd learned to hide. Martinez Sergeant Cooper's voice echoed through the locker room. 911 dispatch, possible domestic. They need our best on this one. Nancy closed her locker, checked her utility belt with practiced efficiency. Whatever personal storms raged inside, she was first and foremost a police officer. Tonight, someone needed her focus to be exactly there. Jacob Martinez moved through the bustling halls of Roosevelt High School, where he'd served as guidance counselor for the past decade. His office door bore a simple placard, Mr. M, here to help, and the students knew it wasn't just words. At 36, his salt and pepper hair and warm brown eyes gave him an approachable presence that made even the most troubled teens feel at ease. Today had been particularly challenging: 3 college recommendation letters, a student struggling with domestic violence, and a parent conference that ran 2 hours over. But Jacob's mind kept drifting to the calendar notification on his phone: Nancy's next fertility appointment, scheduled for next month. They'd agreed to try one last time, though neither spoke about what last really meant. His colleagues often asked how he managed to stay so positive despite everything. What they didn't see were the quiet moments at home, reorganizing the room that wasn't yet a nursery, holding Nancy through silent tears after each loss, writing journals to children they hadn't met. Still, Jacob believed in hope. It's what he taught his students every day, that life's darkest moments often preceded its brightest turning points. As he packed up his briefcase, his phone buzzed. Nancy's text was brief: emergency call. Might be late. Love you. He typed back quickly: stay safe. Dinner will be waiting. At 5 years old, Maggie Andrews carried her mother's eyes and her father's determined chin. Her small world had once been filled with the scent of her mother's vanilla perfume and the sound of her father's keys jingling as he returned from work. Now that world had shrunk to a cramped apartment where the radiator clanked through sleepless nights and the neighbor's German shepherd barked at shadows. In her pink backpack, carefully tucked between worksheets from a kindergarten she no longer attended, lay her most precious possession, a worn teddy bear named Mr. Buttons. Her father had given it to her on her 4th birthday, just 3 months before the accident. that her mother wouldn't talk about. Mr. Buttons wore a little yellow ribbon that matched the one in Maggie's dark hair, though hers had grown ragged from weeks without proper care. She was smart in the way that children who grow up too fast often are. She noticed how her mother's hands shook when opening mail, how they'd stopped going to the park, how Mummy jumped at every unexpected noise. Maggie had learned to be quiet, to make herself small, to save half her sandwich from lunch, because sometimes Mummy forgot about dinner. But today was different. Today Mummy hadn't moved at all, and Maggie remembered the one thing her mother had drilled into her head: if something feels wrong, if Mummy can't help, call 911. 6 months ago, Robert Andrews had been a rising star at Meridian Financial Group, his corner office on the 32nd floor overlooking the city he'd sworn to protect. As the company's lead compliance officer, his signature carried weight, his word was bond, and his ethical standards were unimpeachable. Then came the irregularities in the foreign accounts, the whispered meetings behind closed doors, and finally the tragic car accident. That left his brake lines mysteriously severed. Sarah Andrews, once a celebrated investigative journalist for the City Herald, had traded her press credentials for a life of quiet suburbia when Maggie was born. But the reporter's instincts never quite left her. In the aftermath of Robert's death, as she sorted through his papers late at night, patterns emerged that made her blood run cold. The insurance policy that wouldn't pay out, the encrypted files on his laptop, the business card of a federal prosecutor tucked into his wallet. Their love story had begun 15 years ago at a charity gala. The ambitious financial officer and the tenacious reporter who'd been investigating his company. Instead of finding corruption, she'd found integrity personified. Now their story had transformed into something darker: a widow piecing together her husband's final investigation, a mother trying to protect their daughter from truths too dangerous to speak aloud. Officer Nancy Martinez switched on her cruiser's emergency lights as dispatcher Sharon Williams' voice crackled through the radio. Possible domestic situation: 5-year-old caller. Location triangulated to the Oakwood Heights district, vicinity of Cedar and 15th. The setting sun cast long shadows across the deteriorating neighborhood, where foreclosure signs had become as common as streetlights. Copy that. Any contact with other family members? Nancy adjusted her body camera, protocol ingrained after years on the force. Negative. Child reports mother unresponsive. No father mentioned. We're pulling records for the cell phone now. The first address they tried was a dead end, a well-maintained colonial where an elderly couple had lived for 30 years. But the husband remembered the Andrews family. They were good people, he said, shaking his head. Robert's death hit them hard. Sarah and the little girl moved to the subsidized housing complex across town. As Nancy's team regrouped, Officer Chen pulled up the file on Robert Andrews. Single vehicle accident, 6 months ago. Brake failure. Insurance investigation inconclusive. Something in the clinical language of the report made Nancy's investigative instincts stir. The subsidized housing complex loomed ahead, a maze of identical buildings with peeling paint and security doors that hadn't worked in years. The November wind carried the sound of a dog barking, persistent, agitated. Nancy remembered Maggie mentioning a dog in her 911 call. But following the sound, they found Building D. Most windows were dark, but in one ground-floor apartment, a dim light flickered. Through the window, Nancy caught a glimpse of movement, a small figure huddled in the corner. Maggie, Nancy called out, approaching carefully. "This is the police. We're here to help." A tiny face appeared at the window, tear-streaked and frightened. "Are you the 911 lady?" "I'm Officer Nancy. Can you open the door for us?" The child hesitated, clutching a worn teddy bear. "Mommy said not to open the door for anyone." Nancy softened her voice, crouching to meet Maggie's eye level. "Your mummy was right to teach you that, but you called 911, remember? We're here because you were brave and asked for help. After what seemed like an eternity, small footsteps approached the door. The lock clicked. As the door swung open, the metallic odor that Sharon had detected over the phone hit Nancy full force. Her heart sank as her training kicked in. Officer Chen secured the perimeter. Thompson, call, EMT standby. Nancy kept her voice steady, focused on the trembling child before her. Maggie, sweetheart, when was the last time you saw your mummy? The little girl's answer would set in motion a chain of events that would unravel not just the mystery of that night, but a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of corporate power. But in that moment, all Nancy saw was a frightened child who needed her help. Maggie, stay with Officer Chen, Nancy instructed, her flashlight beam cutting through the apartment's shadows. The air grew heavier as she moved deeper into the space, noting signs of hasty departure, half-packed boxes, scattered papers, a cold cup of coffee on the kitchen counter. Sarah Andrews, she called out, protocol warring with growing apprehension. This is the police. Are you here? The apartment layout was standard for subsidized housing: living room, kitchenette, 2 small bedrooms, nothing out of place except the obvious absence of the one person who should be there. Nancy's beam caught a detail others might have missed: scuff marks on the linoleum, leading toward a door she initially took for a closet. Thompson, I've got a basement access. Requesting backup. The door wasn't locked, but it opened with reluctance, hinges protesting. The beam of Nancy's flashlight revealed narrow wooden stairs descending into darkness. Each step brought that metallic scent stronger, mixing now with the musty underground air. Mrs. Andrews? Police Nancy's voice echoed in the confined space. At the bottom of the stairs, her light caught something that made her breath catch: a woman's shoe, overturned. Beyond it, a scatter of papers, some bearing the letterhead of Meridian Financial Group. And then, in the beam's unforgiving glare, Sarah Andrews. She lay as if sleeping, one hand still clutching what appeared to be a file folder. No signs of violence, no obvious trauma, but the stillness told Nancy everything she needed to know. Dispatch, this is Martinez. I need EMTs and the medical examiner at my location immediately. Her voice remained professional, even as her heart ached for the child upstairs. Possible deceased, approximately 35-year-old female. As she secured the scene, Nancy's trained eye caught details that raised immediate red flags. The papers strewn about weren't random. They formed a trail from an open laptop to where Sarah lay. A half-drunk glass of water sat on a makeshift desk, condensation still beading its surface. On the wall, a corkboard held newspaper clippings about Robert Andrews' accident, connected by red strings to financial documents and photographs. Officer Martinez. Thompson called from upstairs. EMTs are 3 minutes out. How do you want to handle the child? The question brought Nancy back to the immediate crisis. Procedure dictated that Maggie should be taken to Child Protective Services immediately. But something about this scene, the meticulous investigation board, the fresh water glass, the laptop still humming, suggested that Sarah Andrews' death was more than a tragic accident. Keep her upstairs, away from the basement entrance, and get me the detective division. This just became more than a welfare check. Detective Mark Sullivan arrived as the medical examiner was confirming what they already knew. Sarah Andrews had been dead for approximately 12 hours, preliminary cause appearing to be cardiac arrest. But it was the scene around her that commanded his attention. Walk me through it, Martinez. Sullivan requested, pulling on latex gloves. 20 years of homicide investigation had taught him that first responders often caught details others missed. Victim appears to have been working late into the night, Nancy began, gesturing to the investigation board. These documents detail suspicious transactions at Meridian Financial, where her husband worked before his death 6 months ago. The laptop still running, suggesting this wasn't planned. Sullivan studied the corkboard. Car accident report on the husband, internal audit documents, offshore account statements. She was building a case. The medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Wells called them over. No signs of struggle or trauma, but I'm noting several indicators of extreme stress, chronic sleep deprivation, poor nutrition. This woman was running herself ragged. Nancy's attention was drawn to a small detail, a printed email dated just 2 days ago. The sender's name had been redacted, but the subject line read, "Re-evidence, secured meeting confirmed." "Detective," she said, pointing to the email, "looks like she was planning to meet someone." Sullivan was already dialing his phone. "I need a forensics team here now, full workup documents, digital devices, everything. And get me everything we have on Robert Andrews' accident. Something tells me these deaths are connected." A commotion upstairs interrupted them. Officer Chen's voice carried down, "Sir, you can't come in here. This is an active crime scene." Heavy footsteps approached, followed by a man in an expensive suit. "I'm Richard Coleman, Meridian Financial's Chief Legal Officer. We received an alert that one of our laptops was accessing secure servers from this location." Sullivan stepped forward, blocking Coleman's view of the basement. "That laptop is now evidence in a potential criminal investigation, Mr. Coleman. Any claims of corporate property will need to go through proper channels." "Of course," Coleman replied smoothly, handing over his card. "We just want to ensure any sensitive client information is properly protected. I'm sure you understand." After Coleman left, Sullivan turned to Nancy. "Martinez, I want you to stick with this. Something about that corporate lawyer showing up so quickly doesn't sit right. Stay with the girl until child services arrives. See if she knows anything." Nancy nodded, but her mind was already working. The speed of Coleman's appearance, Sarah's research, Robert's accident, pieces of a puzzle were starting to form, but the picture they suggested was troubling. Upstairs, she could hear Maggie's small voice asking Officer Chen when her mummy would wake up. The real investigation was just beginning, but its first casualty would be a 5-year-old's innocence. Nancy sat in the emergency room's waiting area, watching Maggie sleep fitfully on the vinyl chairs. The child had refused to let go of her teddy bear, even during the mandatory medical checkup. Social services was running late, caught in the web of Friday night emergencies across the city. Officer Martinez, Dr. Sarah Reynolds approached, clipboard in hand. "Can we talk privately?" Nancy gently extracted herself, making sure not to wake Maggie. They moved to a quiet corner of the waiting room. "Physically, she's undernourished, but otherwise healthy," Dr. Reynolds began. "However, I'm concerned about the psychological impact. She's exhibiting signs of chronic anxiety, likely predating today's events. Has she said anything about their living situation?" Nancy shook her head. "Only that they moved a lot. The neighbor at their old address mentioned financial troubles after the father's death." "There's something else." Dr. Reynolds lowered her voice. "During the examination, I noticed old prescription bottles in her backpack. Anti-anxiety medication prescribed to Sarah Andrews. The dosage suggests she was dealing with severe panic attacks." A piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Sarah Andrews hadn't just been investigating her husband's death, she'd been terrified of something or someone. Nancy watched as Maggie stirred in her sleep, clutching Mr. Buttons tighter. The bear's yellow ribbon matched the one in her hair, now tangled and dirty. Without thinking, Nancy reached into her pocket and pulled out a spare hair tie she kept for long shifts. As she gently worked the tangles from Maggie's hair, the child opened her eyes. "Is Mummy better now?" The question hit Nancy like a physical blow. In her 15 years on the force, she'd delivered devastating news countless times, but never to someone so young, so vulnerable. "Sweetheart," she began, then stopped. "How do you explain death to a child who's already lost so much?" Maggie's next words caught her off guard. "The bad men made Daddy go away. Did they make Mummy go away too?" Nancy's police instincts sharpened. "What bad men, Maggie?" But the child had retreated into silence, burying her face in Mr. Button's worn fur. A text message lit up Nancy's phone case files on Robert Andrews arriving. "You need to see this. Sullivan." Just then, Patricia Chen appeared with a child services representative, a tired-looking woman clutching forms. "We found an emergency placement," the woman announced. "The Peterson family can take her tonight." Maggie's grip on Nancy's uniform tightened. Something in the child's desperate clutch, in the way she'd trusted Nancy from that first moment at the apartment, made the next words tumble out before she could stop them. "I'll take her." The social worker blinked. "Officer Martinez, I appreciate your concern, but there are procedures." "I'm certified for emergency foster care," Nancy interrupted. "Check your records. My husband and I completed the training last year." It was true, though the certification had been part of their backup plan if the fertility treatments failed. Now, looking at Maggie's hopeful face, Nancy realized some choices were made by the heart before the head could catch up. Detective Sullivan spread the files across his desk as Nancy entered his office early Saturday morning. After dropping Maggie off with Jacob, who had immediately transformed their guest room into a child's sanctuary, she'd come straight to the precinct. "You're not going to believe this," Sullivan said, gesturing to the documents. "Robert Andrews wasn't just Meridian Financial's compliance officer. He was working with the FBI's white-collar crime division." Nancy picked up a heavily redacted report. Undercover. Unofficial cooperation. 6 months ago, he flagged a series of suspicious transactions, billions in client funds being routed through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. But here's where it gets interesting. Sullivan pulled out a photograph showing Robert Andrews in what appeared to be a parking garage, meeting with a man whose face was obscured. This was taken 3 days before his accident. Nancy studied the image. The timing of Coleman's appearance at the scene yesterday wasn't coincidence, was it? Not even close. "Look at this." Sullivan opened his laptop, showing an email chain recovered from Sarah's computer. Sarah had arranged a meeting with a federal prosecutor for next week. She'd found something concrete. The office door opened, and Captain Eleanor Walsh entered, her expression grave. "Martinez, Sullivan, we have a situation. Richard Coleman was found dead in his office an hour ago. Apparent suicide." Nancy's instincts flared. Too convenient. "My thoughts exactly," Walsh agreed. "But here's the twist: he left a USB drive labeled insurance in his desk. Tech team's working on it now, but preliminary results show detailed records of systematic fraud going back decades." Sullivan leaned forward, a fall guy preparing to take others down with him. "Or someone making sure the trail ends with him," Nancy added, thinking of the terror Sarah Andrews must have lived with. Walsh's phone buzzed. After reading the message, her face hardened. "Martinez, you need to hear this. Meridian's board just announced an emergency press conference. They're claiming Sarah Andrews was involved in embezzlement, suggesting she killed herself out of guilt when discovery was imminent." Nancy felt her blood boil. They're trying to discredit her before the truth comes out. "It gets worse," Walsh continued. "They're filing for emergency custody of Maggie, claiming she needs to be protected from potentially corrupt influences while the investigation continues. Their lawyers are arguing that your involvement represents a conflict of interest." Nancy's phone lit up with a text from Jacob, 2 men in suits, asking questions about Maggie at my school today. Said they were from child services but wouldn't show credentials. The pieces clicked together with chilling clarity. Sarah Andrews hadn't been pursuing justice just for her husband. She'd been trying to protect her daughter from people who'd already proven they'd killed to keep their secrets. "Captain," Nancy said, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart, "I need protection detail on my house immediately, and get me everything we have on Meridian's board of directors. If they want a war, we'll give them one." The automotive forensics lab at the City Police Department remained quiet on Saturday afternoon as Nancy and Detective Sullivan reviewed the evidence from Robert Andrews' fatal crash. Frank Miller, the department's veteran crash investigator, spread the photographs across the light table. "Look at the brake line damage," Miller pointed to a close-up image. "Initial investigation ruled it as wear and tear, but I'm seeing something different now." He traced his finger along the clean cut in the metal. This wasn't deterioration. The line was deliberately severed with a specialized tool, likely a tubing cutter. Sullivan examined the maintenance records. Andrews had his car serviced at Precision Auto 2 days before the accident. Full inspection, including brake system check. Everything logged as perfect condition. "I spoke with the mechanic who performed that inspection," Nancy added, consulting her notes. "Thomas Reeves. He quit his job the day after the accident, cleaned out his apartment, and disappeared. No digital footprint since." Miller pulled up the crash scene photographs on his computer. The impact pattern suggests Andrews was fully conscious and trying to avoid the collision. He knew the brakes had failed and attempted to use the emergency brake. He highlighted a detail in the image. "See these skid marks? He almost managed to stop the vehicle." "A man who knew he was being hunted," Sullivan murmured. "What did you find in the vehicle's GPS records?" Nancy opened her laptop. 2 weeks before his death, Andrews made 3 trips to locations that don't match any known business or personal connections. First, a storage facility in the industrial district. Second, a coffee shop known to be a regular meeting spot for federal agents. Third, a law office specializing in whistleblower protection. Sullivan's phone buzzed with a text. His expression darkened as he read it. "The USB drive from Coleman's office? Most of it's encrypted, but our tech team found something interesting. A series of payments to Precision Auto, routed through 3 different shell companies." They bought the Mechanics Corporation, Nancy concluded. But why kill Coleman now? "Because Sarah was getting too close," Sullivan replied. "Look at the timeline. Robert documents fraud, begins cooperating with the feds. They eliminate him. Sarah picks up the investigation. They eliminate her. Coleman was their cleanup man, but something made him a liability." Nancy's mind went to Maggie, safely at home with Jacob. The question is, what evidence was Sarah about to reveal? And more importantly, where did she hide it? Miller cleared his throat. "There's something else. In Andrew's car, we found a parking stub from the day he died. Not from his office garage, from a private storage facility across town." "The same one from his GPS records?" Nancy asked. "Exactly. Facility's still there, still operating. And get this, the unit he visited is still under active lease, paid through an anonymous corporate account." Nancy and Sullivan exchanged glances. Whatever Robert Andrews had hidden away, it was worth killing to keep secret. And now his 5-year-old daughter might be the only one who knew how to find it. The Sunday morning service at First Presbyterian Church buzzed with whispered conversations. Nancy felt the stares as she guided Maggie down the familiar aisle, Jacob's steady presence beside them. The child wore a dress hastily purchased the day before, her teddy bear still clutched firmly in her arms. "Did you hear Martha Wilson, head of the church council?" whispered loudly to her companion. "That poor Andrews girl, they're saying her mother was involved in some terrible scandal at that investment firm." Reverend Thomas Davidson approached the family, his weathered face showing concern. "Nancy, Jacob, we missed you at yesterday's community meeting. There's been discussion about the situation." "What kind of discussion?" Reverend Jacob asked, his counselor's instincts detecting the underlying tension. "Richard Coleman's wife, Barbara, she's on our school board. She's raised some concerns about the propriety of a police officer involved in an active investigation taking custody of a key witness." Nancy felt Maggie's small hand tighten in hers. Before she could respond, Eleanor Mitchell, her neighbor of 15 years, stepped forward. "I was at that meeting," Nancy Eleanor said, her voice carrying deliberately. "Barbara Coleman suggested that Sarah Andrews' death wasn't as innocent as it seemed." She implied that having Maggie in the community might put our children at risk. The absurdity of the accusation struck Nancy, but she recognized the calculated nature of the attack. Meridian Financial was systematically isolating Maggie, turning the community's fear and uncertainty against them. Mrs. Coleman also mentioned Eleanor continued, lowering her voice, that her husband had expressed concerns about your objectivity in the investigation before his death. Jacob stepped forward, his usual gentle demeanor hardening. My wife has served this community faithfully for 15 years, and that risk you're talking about is a traumatized 5-year-old child who just lost both her parents. The church fell silent as Maggie suddenly spoke, her small voice clear in the quiet. Mummy said sometimes people believe lies because the truth is scary. Nancy knelt beside her, aware of the watching crowd. That's right, sweetheart. And what else did your mummy teach you? That brave people stand up for the truth, even when they're afraid. Maggie's chin lifted, so like her father's in the photos Nancy had studied. Reverend Davidson cleared his throat. Perhaps we should all remember Matthew 25:40. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. The tension broke as several congregation members stepped forward, offering support, but Nancy noticed Barbara Coleman in the back, speaking intently into her phone. The community's division was just beginning, and somewhere in this web of loyalty and suspicion lay the truth that Sarah Andrews had died protecting. Monday morning arrived with the harsh glare of media attention. Local news vans clustered outside the police precinct as Nancy made her way through the gauntlet of reporters. The morning headlines screamed accusations, officers' judgment questioned in high-profile case, and Meridian Financial demands independent investigation. Inside, Captain Walsh waited in her office with Internal Affairs Investigator James Harrison. The captain's usually warm demeanor had been replaced by professional distance. Officer Martinez Harrison began, consulting his notepad. We need to discuss some concerning developments. Your decision to take emergency custody of Margaret Andrews has raised significant ethical questions. Nancy sat straight-backed in her chair. My credentials for emergency foster care are current and properly filed. That's not the issue, Harrison interrupted. We've received a formal complaint from Meridian Financial's board of directors. They've provided documentation suggesting you had previous contact with Sarah Andrews before her death. He slid a photograph across the desk. It showed Nancy at a coffee shop, apparently in conversation with Sarah Andrews. Nancy's heart sank as she recognized the image. It had been taken 3 months ago when she'd responded to a minor traffic incident involving Sarah's car. This was a routine police interaction, Nancy explained. It's documented in my daily log. The complaint suggests you were sharing confidential information about the Robert Andrews investigation, Harrison continued. They've submitted a request for all your communication records from the past 6 months. Captain Walsh spoke for the first time. Nancy, you need to understand the position we're in. Meridian Financial employs half this city. Their lawyers are pushing for your suspension pending investigation. And Maggie, Nancy's voice remained steady despite her rising anger. Child Services will review the emergency placement, Harrison replied. Given the circumstances, they may determine a neutral party would be more appropriate. A knock at the door interrupted them. Detective Sullivan entered, his expression urgent. Captain, we have a situation. The medical examiner's office was broken into last night. Sarah Andrews' preliminary toxicology reports are missing. Walsh's phone buzzed with an incoming email. Her face darkened as she read it. Channel 5 just received an anonymous tip suggesting Sarah Andrews had a history of prescription drug abuse. They're running the story at noon. Nancy saw the strategy with painful clarity. Meridian wasn't just attacking her credibility, they were systematically destroying Sarah Andrews' reputation, ensuring that any evidence she'd gathered would be dismissed as the ravings of a troubled woman. Before you make any decisions, Nancy said carefully, You should know that Detective Sullivan and I have uncovered evidence suggesting Robert Andrews' death wasn't an accident. We have documentation of suspicious payments and a witness who. That investigation is being reassigned. Harrison cut in. Effective immediately, you're on administrative leave pending review. As Nancy left the office, her phone lit up with a text from Jacob Maggie's school called, "Two lawyers from Meridian's team tried to interview her during recess. I'm bringing her home." The stakes had just risen dramatically. Nancy had 72 hours before the custody review. 72 hours to uncover the truth Sarah Andrews died protecting, or lose not only her career but the child who had become the center of her world. Monday evening found Detective Sullivan and Nancy in a dimly lit coffee shop 3 towns over, far from the prying eyes of local media and Meridian's influence. Despite her administrative leave, Sullivan had insisted on this meeting, calling it unofficial consultation. The storage facility Robert Andrews visited Sullivan began, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "We obtained the security footage from 6 months ago. Watch the last day he accessed his unit." The grainy footage showed Robert Andrews entering the facility at 11:42 p.m., carrying what appeared to be a thick binder. He emerged 40 minutes later empty-handed, but it was his behavior that caught Nancy's attention. Every few steps, he looked over his shoulder, checking for followers. He knew he was being watched, Nancy observed. What was in that unit? "That's where it gets interesting." Sullivan produced another document. "The unit was rented under a shell corporation, but I traced the payments. They originated from a trust fund set up in Maggie's name, with Sarah Andrews as trustee." Nancy processed this information. He wasn't just hiding evidence. He was ensuring Sarah would have access to it. "Exactly. But here's the problem: we can't access the unit without a warrant, and no judge in this jurisdiction will sign one. Meridian's got too much influence." Nancy thought of Maggie, who had barely spoken since the incident at school. Robert must have left some kind of message for Sarah, a way to access the evidence, something that would look innocent to anyone else. Sullivan nodded. "I had the same thought. I've been reviewing everything from their old house. Birthday cards, family photos, anything that might contain a hidden message." He hesitated. "There's something else." The medical examiner who processed Sarah's initial toxicology report. Dr. Patricia Wells. She left town this morning. Told her staff she was taking emergency family leave. She was scared, Nancy concluded. What did she find in those reports? We'll never know. But before she left, she sent this to my secure email. Sullivan showed Nancy a laboratory requisition form. Sarah Andrews had traces of a rare heart medication in her system, one she wasn't prescribed. In high doses, it can trigger cardiac arrest and appear natural. Nancy felt a chill. They made it look like stress and anxiety, knowing her medical history would support that conclusion. But they didn't count on Dr. Wells being thorough, or on you refusing to let this go. Sullivan's phone buzzed. His expression grew serious as he read the message. Nancy, Meridian just filed an emergency petition for Maggie's custody. They're claiming new evidence that Sarah was involved in corporate espionage. The hearing's been moved up to Wednesday morning. Nancy's mind raced. 2 days. They had 2 days to find whatever Robert Andrews had hidden away, or Maggie would disappear into Meridian's custody, along with any chance of exposing the truth. The teddy bear, Nancy said suddenly, remembering something from the night they found Sarah. Mr. Buttons. Maggie said it was a special gift from her father right before he died. She won't let anyone touch it. Sullivan straightened. A 5-year-old's teddy bear. Perfect hiding place. Who would think to look there? But how do we check without traumatizing her further? She's already lost so much. Maybe we don't have to. Sullivan pulled out his phone, showing Nancy a photo from Sarah's investigation board. In the background, barely visible, was a stuffed bear on a shelf, but it wasn't Mr. Buttons. This was taken 4 months ago. Different bear. He gave her the new one right before he died, Nancy realized. Everything we need might be hidden inside, but if we're wrong, you lose her trust. If we're right, we save her life. Sullivan gathered his materials. Your call, Nancy. But whatever you decide, decide fast. Meridian's lawyers won't stop until they have her. Nancy stood, her decision made. Get me everything you can on the judge handling Wednesday's hearing. I need to know if there's anyone left in this town Meridian hasn't bought. As she left the coffee shop, Nancy's phone lit up with a text from Jacob. Maggie asked about her old house today. Says she misses her special hiding place where Daddy kept his secrets. Sometimes, Nancy reflected, the biggest revelations come from the smallest voices. Tuesday morning cast long shadows across the Martinez kitchen as Jacob prepared breakfast, the familiar routine now altered by Maggie's presence at their table. Nancy watched the child methodically arrange her cereal into careful patterns, Mr. Buttons propped beside her plate. The hearing's tomorrow, Jacob said quietly as he joined Nancy by the coffee maker. Have you told her? Before Nancy could respond, a sharp knock at the door made Maggie drop her spoon. The fear in the child's eyes spoke volumes about the trauma she'd endured. Detective Sullivan stood on their doorstep with Captain Walsh. Their expressions suggested this wasn't a social call. We need to talk, Walsh said, her official tone barely masking her concern. Privately. In the living room, Walsh produced a file. Meridian's lawyers submitted these documents this morning. Bank records showing regular payments from Sarah Andrews to your personal account over the past 6 months. That's impossible, Nancy protested. I've never. They're forgeries, Sullivan interrupted. Good ones. They've also produced emails supposedly between you and Sarah discussing Robert's case. They're building a narrative that you were feeding her information, helping her obstruct justice. Jacob's counselor training took over. This is about discrediting Nancy before the hearing. If they can prove she was involved with Sarah's investigation, they'll claim any evidence we find was planted. Nancy finished. Have you traced the documents? Our tech team's working on it, Walsh replied, but Meridian's lawyers are pushing for immediate action. They're demanding we search your house for Sarah's missing laptop. From the kitchen, they heard a crash. Maggie stood in the doorway, milk pooling around her feet from the dropped bowl. You're sending me away, she whispered, tears welling up, just like the bad men said you would. Nancy moved toward her, but Maggie backed away. Sweetheart, no one's sending you anywhere. Liar, the child's scream held months of accumulated fear and grief. Everyone lies. Daddy said he'd come home, but he didn't. Mommy said she'd wake up, but she didn't. Now you're lying too. Jacob knelt beside the distraught child. Maggie, remember what we talked about in our special talks? About big feelings being okay. Maggie clutched Mr. Buttons tighter, then suddenly hurled the bear across the room. I hate you. I hate everyone. The bear hit the wall with a peculiar thud, not the soft impact a stuffed toy should make. As Maggie ran upstairs, Sullivan picked up the bear, his investigator's instincts alert. Nancy, he said slowly, there's something solid inside this bear. For a moment the room fell silent. Then Jacob spoke, his voice firm. Before you cut open that bear and destroy whatever trust we've built with that child, you better be damn sure it's worth it. Nancy felt the weight of her badge, currently suspended, and the heavier weight of Maggie's trust. If we don't find what Robert hid, Meridian wins. They'll take her and we'll never see her again. Then let me talk to her first, Jacob proposed, not as a cop's husband or a counselor, as someone who promised to be her family. Upstairs they could hear Maggie's muffled sobs. Walsh checked her watch. You have until noon. After that I can't hold off the search warrant. Jacob climbed the stairs while Nancy examined the bear with Sullivan. Through the worn fur, she could feel something hard and rectangular. A USB drive, maybe Sullivan suggested. Or a key. Nancy remembered Robert's last known movements: the storage facility, the coffee shop, the law office. He knew they were coming for him. Everything he discovered, everything Sarah later investigated, it could all be right here. And we're about to destroy a traumatized child's last connection to her father to get it, Walsh added soberly. From upstairs came an unexpected sound: Maggie's laugh, followed by Jacob's gentle voice telling a story. Nancy recognized it, the tale of a brave princess who kept her father's most important treasure safe until the right moment. "Wait," she said suddenly. "Jacob's not just comforting her. He's asking for permission." 20 minutes later, Maggie descended the stairs holding Jacob's hand. Her eyes were red but determined. "Daddy said Mr. Buttons was keeping something special for when Mummy and I really needed help," she announced. I think we really need help now." With tender care, Nancy and Detective Sullivan opened Mr. Buttons along his back seam. Inside, nestled among the stuffing, they found a small metal case containing a USB drive and a safety deposit box key. Maggie watched from Jacob's protective embrace as Sullivan connected the drive to a secure laptop. "It's encrypted," Sullivan announced, staring at the prompt on the screen. "We need a password." Maggie stepped forward, her voice small but steady. "Daddy always said our special word when he tucked me in. He said to remember it was like a magic spell." "Do you remember what it was, sweetheart?" Nancy asked gently. "Buttercup, Princess," Maggie replied, "because that was Mummy's favorite flower, and he said I was their little princess." Sullivan entered the password. The screen filled with folders, each meticulously labeled with dates and transaction codes. But it was a video file marked for Sarah and Maggie that caught their attention. Robert Andrews' face filled the screen, recorded in what appeared to be his office late at night. "Sarah, if you're watching this, then what I feared has happened. The corruption at Meridian goes deeper than anyone suspected. Board members William Preston and Marcus Davidson have been orchestrating a massive fraud scheme, stealing billions from pension funds and retirement accounts." Nancy noticed Captain Walsh tense at the mention of Davidson's name. The implications were staggering. Marcus Davidson was the mayor's brother-in-law. Robert continued, his voice growing urgent. "I've documented everything: the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the bribes to regulatory officials. But most importantly, I found proof they've done this before. 3 other companies, 3 other whistleblowers who died in accidents. I couldn't stay silent. Knowing they were stealing from people who trusted us with their life savings." He paused, emotion crossing his face. "Maggie, my sweet girl, I'm so sorry I can't be there to protect you, but I need you to be brave a little longer. The key in Mr. Buttons opens box 247 at First National. Everything needed to expose them is there, including proof they tampered with my car." The video ended with Robert looking directly into the camera. "Sarah, trust no one at Meridian. They have people everywhere: police, courts, local government. But there's one person I've vetted thoroughly, someone with a reputation for absolute integrity. Find Officer Nancy Martinez. She's the only one who can help you now." The room fell silent. Nancy felt the weight of Robert's trust, given months before she'd ever met his family. Now she understood why Sarah had seemed familiar with her name during that traffic stop she'd been assessing Nancy, verifying her husband's judgment. "The safety deposit box," Sullivan said, breaking the silence. "We need to get there before Meridian realizes what we've found." "There's more," Walsh added, reviewing the files. "Names of judges on Meridian's payroll, including," she stopped, her face paling, "including Judge Hamilton. He's presiding over tomorrow's custody hearing." Jacob held Maggie closer. "Can we request a different judge?" "Not without showing cause," Sullivan replied. "And if we reveal what we know too soon, they'll make everything disappear," Nancy finished. She knelt before Maggie. "Sweetheart, your daddy was very brave and very smart. He left these clues because he knew you'd be brave too. Can you be brave a little longer?" Maggie nodded, reaching for Mr. Buttons. As Nancy handed her the bear, now carefully resewn, the child whispered, Daddy said sometimes the biggest heroes look just like regular people, like you and Mr. Jacob. Walsh checked her watch. First National closes at 5. If we're doing this, we need to move now. But Nancy, you're still on administrative leave. If you're caught anywhere near that safety deposit box. I won't be, Nancy replied, a plan forming. But I know someone they'll never suspect, someone whose reputation is absolutely spotless. She turned to Jacob. How do you feel about an early lunch break from school, Mr. Respected Community Counselor? By early afternoon, Jacob Martinez arrived at First National Bank, projecting the calm authority that had made him one of the city's most respected school counselors. The bank manager, Ann Thompson, personally escorted him to the safety deposit vault, their footsteps echoing through the marble corridor. We don't usually accommodate same-day access requests, Thompson mentioned, examining Jacob's credentials, but given your standing in the community, we've made an exception. Jacob maintained his professional demeanor. I appreciate that. These school board documents need to be reviewed before tomorrow's meeting. The lie felt heavy, but necessary. As Thompson left him alone in the viewing room with box 247, Jacob's hands remained steady. Inside, he found a thick manila envelope and a smaller, sealed letter addressed to the person my husband trusted. Following Nancy's instructions, he photographed everything with the micro-camera concealed in his tie-clip, standard police equipment repurposed for this crucial mission. Meanwhile, across town, Nancy and Sullivan monitored the operation from an unmarked van. Through Jacob's hidden microphone, they heard him gathering the materials. Everything proceeded smoothly until a familiar voice echoed through their headphones. Mr. Martinez, what a surprise! The measured tones of Richard Coleman's widow, Barbara, sent a chill through Nancy. I didn't expect to find you here. Mrs. Coleman, Jacob's voice remained steady. My condolences on your loss. How interesting that you're accessing a safety deposit box today. Of all days, Barbara's voice hardened, especially one registered to Robert Andrews. Through the camera feed, Nancy watched Barbara gesture to someone outside the viewing room. 2 men in suits appeared in the doorway. Meridian's security team. I believe, Barbara continued, you should accompany us to a more private location. We have much to discuss about your wife's interference in corporate matters. Jacob's response was interrupted by the bank manager's return. Is everything all right here? Thompson asked, noting the tension. Mrs. Coleman was just leaving, Jacob replied calmly. She knows that attempting to interfere with a federal investigation would be unwise. Nancy held her breath. They had no federal backing. It was a bluff. Barbara's eyes narrowed. Federal investigation. Why else would Agent Harrison have visited your husband's office last Friday? Jacob's counselor training served him well, his tone conveying absolute certainty about information he couldn't possibly have. The gambit worked. Barbara hesitated, uncertain whether her late husband had been cooperating with authorities before his death. The 2 security men exchanged glances. Another time, perhaps, Barbara said finally, backing away, do give Nancy my regards. Once she'd gone, Jacob quickly finished photographing the documents. As he prepared to leave, he noticed something else in the box, a small recording device with a note, play me last. Back in the van, Nancy and Sullivan reviewed the photographs while Jacob drove separately to avoid being followed. The manila envelope contained what they'd expected: financial records, offshore account details, evidence of systematic fraud. But it was the sealed letter that made Nancy's hands shake as she read it. Officer Martinez. Sarah's neat handwriting began, if you're reading this, then Robert was right about you. What they're stealing isn't just money, it's people's futures, their children's education funds, their retirement dreams. The recording will give you the final piece, but be careful. The day Robert died, he discovered someone inside the police department was working with them. That's why he trusted only you. Your reputation for integrity made you the one person they couldn't buy. Keep Maggie safe. She's all that's left of our fight for justice. Sullivan played the recording through headphones, his expression growing grave. "Nancy, you need to hear this. It's a conversation between Robert and Marcus Davidson, recorded the day before the accident. Davidson isn't just involved, he's been orchestrating similar schemes across 3 states. The pension fund fraud is just the tip of the iceberg." Nancy's phone buzzed with a text from Captain Walsh. "Meridian's lawyers just submitted new evidence for tomorrow's hearing. They're claiming Jacob accessed private corporate documents without authorization. Judge Hamilton has called an emergency pre-hearing review in 1 hour." Time was running out. As the pieces aligned, Nancy realized their next move would determine not just Maggie's fate, but the future of countless families who didn't yet know they'd been betrayed. The courthouse corridors hummed with tension as Nancy entered courtroom 3 billion. Judge Hamilton presided from the bench, his usual stern demeanor heightened by the emergency nature of the hearing. Barbara Coleman sat with Meridian's legal team, a polished array of attorneys from the prestigious firm Carson Walsh. "This court has convened to address serious allegations of misconduct," Judge Hamilton began, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Meridian Financial has presented evidence suggesting Jacob Martinez accessed confidential corporate documents without authorization, potentially compromising an ongoing internal investigation." Nancy observed the measured confidence in Barbara Coleman's posture, the slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Beside Nancy, Detective Sullivan discreetly placed a laptop on the defense table, connected to a small thumb drive. Furthermore, Hamilton continued, "The timing of Mr. Martinez's actions raises questions about potential interference with tomorrow's custody hearing regarding Margaret Andrews." Nancy rose, maintaining professional composure. "Your Honor, we request permission to present evidence pertinent to these allegations." "Objection," Meridian's lead counsel interjected. "Any evidence obtained through unauthorized access to corporate documents should be inadmissible." Judge Hamilton adjusted his glasses, considering. "Mrs. Martinez, given your current administrative leave status, I'm not inclined to." "Your Honor," Sullivan interrupted, standing. "I have here a federal warrant authorizing the release of all documents contained in Safety Deposit Box 247 at First National Bank." The warrant, obtained through Sullivan's FBI contacts mere hours ago, landed on Hamilton's desk. Nancy noticed the judge's hand trembling slightly as he reviewed it. Additionally, Sullivan continued, "We have evidence suggesting the late Robert Andrews was cooperating with a federal investigation into securities fraud at Meridian Financial." Barbara Coleman's smile faltered. From the gallery, Jacob entered with Captain Walsh and, to everyone's surprise, FBI Special Agent Catherine Reynolds. "The Department of Justice has been building this case for months," Reynolds announced, approaching the bench. "Robert Andrews was our confidential informant. His death, and subsequently Sarah Andrews' death, are now part of a federal homicide investigation." Judge Hamilton's complexion paled noticeably. "I don't see how this relates to tomorrow's custody hearing." "Then allow me to clarify," Nancy stated, nodding to Sullivan. The detective activated the laptop, and Robert Andrews' voice filled the courtroom through the recorded conversation with Marcus Davidson. As the recording played, detailing the systematic fraud and Davidson's role, Nancy watched the color drain from Barbara Coleman's face. But it was Judge Hamilton's reaction that confirmed their suspicions. His hands gripped the bench, knuckles white. "Your Honor," Nancy concluded, "this evidence demonstrates that Meridian's custody petition is not about Maggie Andrews' welfare. It's about silencing the last living witness to their criminal conspiracy." "I've heard enough," Hamilton declared, reaching for his gavel. "Have you?" Judge Agent Reynolds interjected, "because we haven't yet discussed the offshore account in your wife's maiden name, receiving regular payments from Meridian's shell corporations." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Hamilton's gavel remained suspended in midair. "I move for an immediate recess," Meridian's counsel demanded. "Denied," came a new voice. Chief Judge Margaret Pearson strode into the courtroom. "Judge Hamilton, please step down. This court is now under federal jurisdiction." As federal marshals entered, Nancy felt a small hand slip into hers. Maggie had entered quietly with Jacob, Mr. Buttons clutched to her chest. "Was I brave like Daddy wanted?" she whispered. Nancy squeezed her hand, watching as Barbara Coleman and Judge Hamilton were led away. "You were braver than anyone could have imagined, sweetheart." The federal courthouse buzzed with activity as Special Agent Reynolds presented the full scope of Meridian Financial's criminal enterprise. The grand jury proceedings had drawn national media attention, with financial networks broadcasting live from the courthouse steps. But the evidence reveals a systematic pattern of fraud spanning 15 years, Reynolds testified, her precise delivery making the complex scheme clear. Meridian Financial, under the direction of its board members, diverted over $4.2 billion from pension funds and retirement accounts through a network of shell companies. From her seat in the gallery, Nancy observed William Preston, Meridian's CEO, as the evidence mounted against him. His usual aristocratic bearing had crumbled under the weight of Robert Andrews' meticulous documentation. Mr. Andrews discovered the fraud during a routine compliance audit, Reynolds continued. When he attempted to report his findings internally, the board initiated what we now know as Protocol Silence, a predetermined series of steps to eliminate potential whistleblowers. The grand jury leaned forward as Reynolds displayed a flow chart recovered from Sarah Andrews' laptop. The protocol involved 3 phases: financial destruction, social isolation, and, if necessary, elimination. Robert Andrews wasn't their first victim. We've identified 3 similar cases in other states. Marcus Davidson, the mayor's brother-in-law, was led into the courtroom in handcuffs. His testimony, secured through a plea agreement, provided the final pieces of the puzzle. Robert Andrews threatened everything, Davidson admitted, his voice barely audible. He had proof that we'd been targeting vulnerable retirees, promising guaranteed returns while channeling their funds through offshore accounts. When conventional intimidation failed, the board activated Protocol Silence. Nancy felt Maggie squeeze her hand as Davidson described her father's murder. The child's strength continued to amaze her. Sitting through the proceedings had been Maggie's choice, insisted upon with a determination that echoed her parents' courage. After Robert's death, Davidson continued, Sarah Andrews began piecing together the evidence. She discovered something we'd overlooked. Robert had been building a case for the FBI. That's when Barbara Coleman suggested we use the custody hearing to gain control of their daughter, knowing Sarah had likely shared information with her. The prosecutor stood. And Mrs. Andrews' death. Davidson's composure cracked. The heart medication was Barbara's idea. She had access through her position on the hospital board. It was supposed to look natural. Stress-induced heart failure in a grieving widow. As the testimony concluded, Special Agent Reynolds approached Nancy and Maggie. "We've frozen all of Meridian's assets, but we've identified and secured the Andrews family's personal accounts. Robert had the foresight to establish a trust for Maggie, completely separate from Meridian. Her future is protected." The grand jury's indictment was unanimous. Within hours, federal agents arrested 12 board members across 3 states. Judge Hamilton faced separate charges for judicial corruption, and Barbara Coleman's immunity deal required full cooperation with ongoing investigations. Outside the courthouse, Nancy held Maggie close as reporters clamored for statements. Jacob stepped forward, shielding them from the cameras, but Maggie, displaying that same quiet strength, turned to face the crowd. "My daddy and mommy were heroes," she declared, her clear voice silencing the media frenzy. "They protected people they didn't even know, because it was right. And now Officer Nancy and Mr. Jacob protect me, because that's right too." Reynolds watched the scene with satisfaction. "You know," she told Nancy quietly, In all my years investigating financial crimes, I've never seen evidence compiled as meticulously as Robert Andrews' documentation. He didn't just prove the fraud, he made sure the proof would protect his daughter. Police Chief Thomas Richards stood before the assembled press in the department's briefing room, his formal demeanor reflecting the gravity of the occasion. Behind him, a display showed photographs of Robert and Sarah Andrews alongside documentation of Meridian's crimes. The Internal Affairs investigation into Officer Nancy Martinez's conduct has concluded, Richards announced. Not only has Officer Martinez been completely cleared of any wrongdoing, but her actions have revealed one of the largest financial fraud cases in our state's history. Nancy sat in the front row, Jacob and Maggie beside her, as the chief continued. The dedication and integrity Officer Martinez displayed throughout this investigation exemplify the highest standards of law enforcement. Effective immediately, she is being promoted to detective, with a special assignment to our newly formed Financial Crimes Division. The vindication was complete, but Nancy found her thoughts turning to Sarah Andrews' final days, a mother working desperately to protect both her child and the truth her husband died defending. Captain Walsh approached the podium next, addressing the department's initial skepticism of Nancy's actions. "We pride ourselves on following procedure," Walsh acknowledged, "but Officer Martinez reminded us that sometimes protecting and serving means looking beyond the obvious. Her instinct to protect Maggie Andrews didn't compromise the investigation. It was key to exposing the truth." The FBI's formal commendation followed, presented by Special Agent Reynolds. The Andrews family's evidence, preserved and brought to light through Detective Martinez's efforts, has led to the recovery of over $3 billion in stolen retirement funds. More importantly, it has prevented Meridian from targeting future victims. As the ceremonies concluded, Nancy's fellow officers lined up to offer congratulations and, more meaningfully, apologies for doubting her judgment. Detective Sullivan handed her a new badge, his gruff manner barely concealing his pride. "You did good, Martinez. Both Andrews would be proud." Later that evening, in the quiet of their home, Nancy found Maggie sitting in the window seat that had become her favorite spot for reading. The child looked up from a photo album of her parents that Sarah had carefully maintained. "Mom and Dad used to say that doing the right thing isn't always easy," Maggie said softly, "but they never said it could make you so many new friends." Nancy sat beside her, touched by Maggie's first unprompted mention of her parents without tears. "Your parents were very wise people. They taught you to be brave and strong." "Like you and Mr. Jacob," Maggie asked, leaning against Nancy's shoulder. "We just followed the example your parents set," Nancy replied. "They never gave up on doing what was right, even when it was hard." Jacob appeared in the doorway holding an envelope. "Speaking of doing what's right, the adoption papers came today. The judge signed them this morning." Maggie's eyes widened. "Does this mean I can call you Mom and Dad now? For real?" Nancy felt tears welling up as she nodded. After all the accusations, investigations, and doubts, this moment, this simple question from a child who had lost so much, made everything worthwhile. "For real," Jacob confirmed, joining them on the window seat. "Although we'll always make sure you remember and honor your first Mom and Dad, too." As the evening light softened, Nancy reflected on the strange path that had led them here. A desperate child's 911 call had unraveled a massive conspiracy, but it had also created something beautiful, a new family forged in the crucible of truth and justice. The First Presbyterian Church Fellowship Hall hosted a different kind of gathering that Sunday afternoon. What began as a simple ceremony to welcome Maggie officially into the Martinez family had transformed into a community's reflection on justice, redemption, and the power of standing together against corruption. Reverend Davidson addressed the assembled congregation, his weathered face bearing the gravity of recent events. "Our community was tested," he began. "We faced a choice between comfortable silence and difficult truth. Through the courage of the Andrews family and the dedication of Nancy and Jacob Martinez, we learned that true faith manifests in actions, not just words." Among the attendees sat many who had initially doubted Nancy's motives. Martha Wilson, who had once whispered suspicions, now helped serve at the reception. Eleanor Mitchell, Nancy's neighbor who had voiced concerns at that pivotal church meeting, had organized the entire celebration. Chief Richards stood to deliver his remarks. The ripple effects of the Meridian investigation continue to spread. This week alone, 3 other financial institutions voluntarily disclosed irregularities in their pension fund management. The example set by our community has sparked a national conversation about corporate accountability. Special Agent Reynolds, who had become a familiar face in town, provided an update that drew profound silence. The recovered funds have been fully restored to the affected retirees. Robert and Sarah Andrews didn't just expose a crime, they protected the life savings of over 15,000 families. The most moving moment came when Maggie's kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Henderson, presented a project her class had created. The children had written messages of welcome to their classmate, decorated with drawings of families in all their diverse forms. In trying to explain recent events to her peers, Mrs. Henderson shared, Maggie taught them that family isn't just about who you're born to, but also about who stands beside you when the truth needs defending. Barbara Coleman's sister, Janet, approached Nancy during the reception. I knew Barbara was troubled, but I never imagined, she paused, struggling with emotions. Thank you for stopping this before more families were destroyed, including hers. Jacob, observing the interactions from his position near the punch bowl, noticed how the community had reorganized itself. The artificial divisions created by wealth and corporate influence had given way to something more authentic: neighbors supporting neighbors, acknowledging their shared vulnerability to institutional corruption. As the afternoon progressed, Captain Walsh pulled Nancy aside. The department's establishing a whistleblower support program, she announced. We'd like you to head it. Your experience with the Andrews case makes you uniquely qualified to help others come forward safely. The celebration concluded with a moment that captured the community's transformation. The congregation, led by Reverend Davidson, gathered around the Martinez family. In standing up for truth, he proclaimed, "You've reminded us that community isn't just about sharing the good times. It's about supporting each other through the difficult ones, about choosing what's right over what's easy." Maggie, now officially Maggie Andrews Martinez, stood between her new parents, Mr. Button still faithfully tucked under her arm. "My first daddy and mummy helped people they didn't know," she announced with the clarity only a child could bring to such a moment. "Now I have a whole family of people who do that too." As the evening light filtered through the stained glass windows, casting warm colors across the gathered faces, Nancy realized that their community hadn't just survived a crisis, it had emerged stronger, more vigilant, and more compassionate. In the quiet aftermath of the Meridian investigation, the personal costs of pursuing justice became increasingly apparent. Detective Nancy Martinez sat in her new office at the Financial Crimes Division, reviewing the final impact statements from victims of Meridian's fraud scheme. An elderly couple, the Petersons, had written about nearly losing their retirement home. A former teacher described postponing critical medical procedures after discovering her pension had been decimated. Each story reinforced the human cost of corporate corruption and the profound courage of Robert and Sarah Andrews in exposing it. Detective Sullivan entered, carrying a thick file. The federal prosecution team completed their final report on the Andrews case, he announced, placing it on Nancy's desk. They've documented every step of Meridian's protocol silence program. It's being used to create new regulatory guidelines for financial institutions. Nancy opened the file, noting the detailed timeline of events leading to Robert's death. Have they determined how many other whistleblowers were silenced before Robert discovered the pattern? 7 confirmed cases across 3 states, Sullivan replied. The earliest dates back to 2008. Each followed the same progression: financial pressure, social isolation, and ultimately staged accidents or apparent suicides. The office phone rang. Jacob calling from the school where he'd resumed his counseling duties. "The superintendent approved our proposal," he reported. We're implementing a new curriculum on ethical decision-making, using the Meridian case as a framework. The students need to understand that integrity isn't just a concept, it's a choice with real consequences. As Nancy concluded the call, Captain Walsh appeared in her doorway. The police union meeting just ended, she informed Nancy. The department's implementing mandatory financial disclosure requirements for all officers above sergeant rank. Robert Andrews' evidence revealed how deeply Meridian had infiltrated law enforcement through strategic investments in personal retirement accounts. The professional fallout continued to ripple through the community. 3 judges had resigned after their connections to Meridian emerged. The mayor's office faced a recall election over his brother-in-law's involvement. Trust in institutions had been severely shaken. Nancy's desk phone buzzed again, the security desk announcing a visitor. Sarah Andrews' former editor at the City Herald, Michael Thompson, had arrived for their scheduled meeting. The newspaper was preparing a comprehensive series on corporate whistleblowers centered on the Andrews family's sacrifice. The public needs to understand the human cost of exposing corruption, Thompson explained, settling into a chair. Not just the dramatic moments, but the quiet devastation, the friendships lost, the careers destroyed, the families torn apart. Robert and Sarah knew the risks, but they chose truth over safety because they understood what was at stake. As if to emphasize his point, Nancy's computer chimed with a new email, another victim impact statement, this one from a retired firefighter who had lost his entire pension. "My wife and I had to move in with our daughter," he wrote. "But thanks to the Andrews family and your investigation, we at least know our grandchildren's college funds are secure now." The true price of truth was measured not just in lives lost, but in the thousands of lives forever altered, both the victims of fraud and those who chose to stand against it. Robert and Sarah Andrews had paid the ultimate price, but their sacrifice had created a ripple effect of accountability and reform that would protect countless others. Nancy glanced at the framed photo on her desk, Maggie at her adoption ceremony, flanked by her new parents but holding a picture of Robert and Sarah. The price of truth had been devastating, but its value was beyond measure. The implications of the Meridian investigation continued to reshape lives in unexpected ways. At home, Nancy and Jacob found themselves navigating the delicate balance between their professional commitments and their newly expanded family responsibilities. Nancy sat in their living room late one evening, reviewing case files from other potential whistleblowers who had come forward following the Meridian exposure. Jacob entered, carrying 2 cups of tea, his expression reflecting the weight of his own day. 3 more students came forward today, he reported, settling beside her. Their parents worked for companies with suspicious financial patterns similar to Meridian. The children are showing signs of anxiety, just like Maggie did. They're afraid of losing their parents. The personal cost of their involvement in the case manifested in subtle ways. Former friends from their country club had quietly distanced themselves, their own financial connections to Meridian making social interactions uncomfortable. The Martinez family had received anonymous threats, requiring them to install additional security measures and alter their daily routines. Dr. Patricia Reynolds, their family physician, had documented the physical toll of the investigation. Nancy's blood pressure had elevated significantly during the custody hearings. Jacob had developed insomnia, his counselor's instinct to help others conflicting with the need to protect his family's privacy. The school board meeting was particularly difficult today, Jacob continued. Half the board members had investments managed by Meridian. They're not openly hostile, but there's an undercurrent of resentment. They see us as the ones who destroyed their retirement plans, rather than the people who exposed the fraud. Nancy understood the complexity of their position. The same actions that had brought justice had also disrupted countless lives. Even those who had benefited from the investigation struggled with the implications. The Petersons, whose retirement funds had been restored, now questioned every financial institution they dealt with. A soft sound from upstairs interrupted their conversation. Maggie stood at the top of the stairs, clutching Mr. Buttons. "I had the dream again," she said quietly. These nightmares had become familiar dreams where her birth parents appeared, asking if she had kept their courage alive. The child psychologist they consulted explained that Maggie was processing not only her grief but also the weight of her parents' legacy. As Jacob went to comfort Maggie, Nancy received a text from Captain Walsh. "Federal prosecution team needs you in Washington next week. Extended testimony required for congressional hearings on financial industry reform." The message highlighted another sacrifice. The constant demands of the ongoing investigation meant time away from their newly formed family. Each development in the case forced them to balance their commitment to justice with their responsibilities at home. Detective Sullivan had warned them about this phase of high-profile cases. The initial adrenaline of investigation gave way to the grinding work of reform and rehabilitation. The system they had helped expose now required their continued involvement to implement meaningful change. Nancy joined Jacob and Maggie upstairs, finding them reading one of Sarah Andrews' old journalism notebook stories of other times she had exposed corruption and fought for justice. These moments of connection with her birth parents helped Maggie understand that sacrifice in service of truth was part of her heritage. "Mum," Maggie asked, using the term that still felt new and precious, "did my first mum and dad know it would be this hard?" Nancy considered the question carefully. "I think they knew that doing the right thing often comes with a price, but they also knew that the cost of staying silent would be even higher." The psychological impact of the Meridian investigation manifested differently for each member of the Martinez family. 6 months after the congressional hearings, they found themselves addressing these emotional aftershocks in their own distinct ways. In their weekly family therapy session with Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, Maggie articulated feelings that demonstrated both her grief and resilience. "Sometimes I feel like I have 2 sets of heroes," she explained, seated between Nancy and Jacob. "My first parents fought the bad people with papers and computers. My new parents fight them with badges and helping other kids." Dr. Morgan observed how Maggie's understanding of justice had evolved beyond her years. The child had developed a sophisticated grasp of moral courage, shaped by the examples of both her birth parents and adoptive family. However, this precocious awareness came with its own challenges. During a parent-teacher conference, Mrs. Henderson expressed concern about Maggie's tendency to approach every conflict as a potential conspiracy. When a classmate's lunch money went missing, Maggie had initiated her own investigation, complete with an evidence board reminiscent of her mother's basement workplace. Jacob addressed these behaviors through his professional expertise as a counselor. "We're teaching her that while it's important to stand up for truth, not every situation requires the same level of vigilance," he explained during a family dinner. "There's a balance between being aware and being overwhelmed by suspicion." Nancy's own emotional processing took a different form. She found herself repeatedly reviewing the security footage from First National Bank on the day Sarah Andrews made her last deposit. The image of Sarah looking over her shoulder while clutching Maggie's teddy bear haunted her dreams. The aftermath affected their marriage as well. Nancy and Jacob discovered that their shared experience had both strengthened their bond and created new challenges. Their commitment to protecting Maggie sometimes manifested as disagreements about security measures and exposure to information about the ongoing investigation. "I keep thinking about the choices Sarah faced," Nancy confided to Jacob one evening. "She knew the risks, yet she continued investigating. As a mother now myself, I understand both her determination and her fear in a way I never could before." Detective Sullivan noticed changes in Nancy's approach to new cases. Her investigative instincts remained sharp, but she now exhibited a deeper appreciation for the human cost of exposure. When interviewing potential whistleblowers, she shared carefully selected details from the Andrews case, helping them understand both the importance and the implications of their decisions. The emotional aftermath extended to their broader community. The support group Jacob established for families affected by corporate fraud revealed common patterns of trauma. Children of whistleblowers displayed similar anxieties to Maggie's, while spouses struggled with the dissolution of long-held social connections. During a quiet moment at Sarah and Robert's grave, where they brought fresh flowers each month, Maggie asked a question that crystallized their ongoing emotional journey. Do you think they knew someone like you would find me? Nancy knelt beside her daughter, noting how Maggie's features had begun to mirror Sarah's determined expression in photographs. I think they hoped someone would understand what they were fighting for. They trusted that good people would recognize the truth and help protect it. The healing process continued, marked by small victories and occasional setbacks. Dr. Morgan noted that the family's strength lay in their ability to acknowledge both their pain and their progress, supporting each other through the complex emotions that accompanied their shared experience. The process of recovery manifested itself in subtle yet significant ways within the Martinez household. 1 year after the Meridian investigation, signs of healing began to emerge through their daily routines and restored sense of normalcy. The most notable transformation occurred in Maggie's bedroom, where once stood a makeshift investigation board mirroring her mother's basement workspace, now hung artwork from her art therapy sessions. Her counselor, Dr. Morgan, had suggested creative expression as a means of processing trauma, and Maggie's paintings told the story of her journey. During a particularly significant therapy session, Dr. Morgan observed a breakthrough moment. Maggie has begun integrating both sets of parents into her narrative, she explained to Nancy and Jacob. Rather than compartmentalizing her experiences, she's creating a coherent story that acknowledges both her loss and her new beginnings. Nancy's professional life reflected similar progress. The Financial Crimes Division she now headed had established protocols for protecting whistleblowers and their families, incorporating lessons learned from the Andrews case. Her team specialized in creating secure channels for reporting corporate malfeasance while maintaining family stability. Jacob's work at Roosevelt High School expanded to include a peer support program for students dealing with family trauma. His experience with Maggie informed his approach to helping teenagers navigate complex emotional territories. The program became a model for other schools in the district. The family's dinner conversations evolved from cautious discussions about safety to more ordinary concerns. Maggie's excitement about her upcoming school play or Jacob's stories about his students' achievements began to take precedence over security measures and court updates. Detective Sullivan noticed the change during his monthly visits. The hypervigilance is subsiding, he remarked to Nancy. You're not checking the windows every time a car drives past anymore. The community's recovery paralleled their own. First Presbyterian Church established a support network for families affected by corporate fraud, with Jacob serving as a counselor and Nancy providing guidance on legal protections. The program helped restore trust among neighbors who had found themselves on opposite sides of the Meridian scandal. A significant milestone occurred when Maggie decided to organize a memorial project at her school. With her art teacher's help, she created a display combining photographs of her birth parents with artwork representing her new family. It's like a bridge, she explained to her classmates. It shows how love can help you cross from sad things to happy things without forgetting. Nancy found her own healing through mentoring young officers. She shared the Andrews case study, emphasizing not just investigative techniques, but also the human elements of protecting vulnerable families. Her experiences helped shape a new generation of law enforcement professionals who understood the delicate balance between justice and compassion. The family's recovery became evident in small, everyday moments: Maggie sleeping through the night without nightmares, Nancy leaving work at reasonable hours to attend school events, Jacob relaxing his protective instincts enough to allow playdates at their home. During a quiet evening at home, as they worked on a jigsaw puzzle together, Maggie made an observation that captured their journey. "You know what's different now?" she asked, fitting a piece into place. "We don't feel like we're hiding anymore. We're just living." Nancy and Jacob exchanged glances, recognizing the truth in their daughter's words. Recovery wasn't about forgetting the past or minimizing their experiences. It was about finding ways to honor their story while embracing the possibility of joy and ordinary happiness. 18 months after the Meridian investigation, Special Agent Reynolds contacted Nancy with an unexpected discovery. The FBI's digital forensics team had finally decrypted Sarah Andrews' personal laptop, revealing a video file dated the night before her death. In the secure viewing room at FBI headquarters, Nancy, Jacob, and Maggie gathered to watch Sarah's final message. The decision to include Maggie had been carefully considered with Dr. Morgan's guidance, who believed that hearing her mother's words directly could provide important closure. The video began with Sarah Andrews seated at her basement desk, her familiar determination evident despite obvious exhaustion. "If you're watching this," she began, "then Robert's contingency plan worked. Officer Martinez, thank you for being the person my husband believed you would be." Nancy felt Maggie's hand tighten in hers as Sarah continued. "To whoever has taken responsibility for protecting my daughter Maggie is not just a witness to be protected. She carries within her the same sense of justice that drove Robert to stand against corruption, and that now compels me to complete what he started." Sarah's message turned personal, addressing her daughter directly. "Maggie, my brave girl, I need you to understand something about your father and me. We didn't choose documents over you. We chose your future, and the futures of countless other children whose parents trusted Meridian with their dreams." The video revealed previously unknown details about Robert's investigation. Sarah explained how he had discovered Meridian's fraud while reviewing pension funds for a children's hospital. The company had been systematically draining retirement accounts that parents had established for children with long-term medical needs. "Your father couldn't walk away once he understood who the victims were," Sarah explained. "He used to say that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what's right, especially when you're terrified." Special Agent Reynolds paused the video to provide context. "This information helped us identify hundreds of additional victims. The restitution fund has been expanded to include families from the children's hospital cases." But as the video resumed, Sarah addressed the broader implications of their investigation. She detailed how Robert had recognized patterns in Meridian's operations that suggested similar schemes at other financial institutions. His final reports, which he had hidden for safekeeping, included evidence of systemic corruption across multiple companies. "I know this burden I'm leaving is enormous," Sarah continued, her voice wavering slightly. "But I've learned something from all this. Truth doesn't die with its discoverers. It finds new guardians, new voices to carry it forward." The final moments of the video captured Sarah's last message to Maggie. "My darling, remember that love takes many forms. Your father and I loved you enough to fight for a world where trust means something. Whoever is caring for you now loves you enough to help you understand why. That love in all its forms is your true inheritance." As the video ended, Maggie surprised everyone by speaking first. "She wasn't just talking to me," then she observed thoughtfully. "She was talking to you too, Mom and Dad. She knew someone would love me enough to help me understand." Nancy and Jacob exchanged glances, struck by their daughter's insight. Sarah's final message had transformed their understanding of their role in Maggie's life. They weren't just protecting a witness or raising someone else's child, they were continuing a legacy of love expressed through commitment to truth and justice. Special Agent Reynolds arranged a second briefing at FBI headquarters to reveal the full scope of Robert Andrews' investigation. The evidence recovered from Sarah's laptop had led to the discovery of additional documents in a secure server that Robert had established before his death. Robert Andrews wasn't just investigating Meridian Financial, Reynolds explained, displaying a complex network diagram on the briefing room screen. He had uncovered a pattern of coordinated fraud across multiple financial institutions. Meridian was merely one node in a larger criminal enterprise. Nancy studied the documentation, noting the meticulous detail characteristic of Robert's work. The investigation encompassed 5 major financial institutions, each operating similar schemes targeting vulnerable populations, retirement communities, medical trust funds, and educational savings accounts. Mr. Andrews recognized the pattern through an anomaly in the Children's Hospital Pension Fund, Reynolds continued. The fraudulent withdrawals followed identical protocols across all 5 institutions. This suggested a shared playbook, likely developed by the same financial architects. The documents revealed that Robert had been building relationships with potential whistleblowers at other institutions. His personal notes detailed meetings with compliance officers who had noticed similar irregularities but feared retaliation. He had been creating a network of witnesses, carefully documenting their observations while protecting their identities. The genius of Robert's approach, Detective Sullivan observed, was its redundancy. He created multiple paths to the truth, knowing that if one failed, others would remain viable. Even his own death wouldn't stop the investigation from moving forward. Nancy recognized the significance of this revelation. That's why they couldn't just destroy the evidence. They never knew how many copies existed or where they were all hidden. Reynolds nodded, bringing up another document. We found this strategic planning document on the secure server. Robert had mapped out a 3-year timeline for exposing the entire network. He anticipated potential obstacles and created contingencies for each scenario, including his own elimination. The most striking aspect of Robert's mission emerged through his personal correspondence with trusted colleagues. In emails and encrypted messages, he repeatedly emphasized that the goal wasn't just to expose fraud, but to create systemic change that would prevent similar schemes in the future. Your father was building more than a case, Nancy explained to Maggie, who had been quietly absorbing the information. He was creating a blueprint for reform. Jacob, drawing on his counselor's expertise, noted the psychological sophistication of Robert's approach. He understood that lasting change requires more than just punishing wrongdoers. It needs structural reforms and cultural transformation. The briefing concluded with Reynolds revealing the final piece of Robert's strategy. We found evidence that Mr. Andrews had been consulting with legislative experts to draft new regulatory frameworks. He wasn't just thinking about prosecution, he was working to prevent future victims. As the family drove home from the briefing, Maggie broke their contemplative silence. So when Daddy was working late all those nights, he wasn't just doing his job. He was trying to fix things for everyone. Nancy considered how to frame this profound truth for a child's understanding. Your father saw that many people were being hurt by something complicated and wrong. Instead of just reporting it, he tried to solve the whole problem, even though he knew it might be dangerous. That's why Mum kept investigating after he died, Maggie concluded. She was helping him finish fixing things. The revelation of Robert's broader mission added new depth to their understanding of the sacrifices the Andrews family had made. They hadn't died simply exposing a single company's crimes, they had given their lives to fundamentally reform a corrupt system. The extent of the corporate scandal became fully apparent during the Senate Banking Committee hearings. Nancy sat in the gallery as William Preston, former CEO of Meridian Financial, faced questioning about the systemic fraud his institution had perpetrated. Senator Elizabeth Morgan led the interrogation with precise, devastating questions drawn from Robert Andrews' documentation. Mr. Preston, can you explain why Meridian specifically targeted retirement accounts belonging to families with chronically ill children? Preston's carefully constructed corporate facade cracked under the scrutiny. Those accounts showed consistent long-term deposits. They were considered stable investments. You mean they were reliable sources of funds to misappropriate, Morgan corrected, displaying Robert's analysis on the chamber screens, because parents saving for their children's medical care rarely withdraw early, even when markets appear unstable. The testimony revealed how Meridian had refined its fraudulent practices over 15 years. They had developed sophisticated algorithms to identify vulnerable account holders, recent widows, elderly retirees, parents of disabled children whose life circumstances made them less likely to closely monitor their investments. Special Agent Reynolds presented evidence showing how the scheme extended beyond Meridian. 5 major financial institutions coordinated their activities, she testified. They shared client data, allowing them to identify optimal targets and avoid detection by spreading the fraud across multiple firms. The hearing reached its climax when Senator Morgan introduced Sarah Andrews' final research. Mrs. Andrews discovered that Meridian's board members held controlling interests in companies manufacturing vital medications. They systematically drained medical savings accounts, forcing families to pay inflated prices for essential treatments. Nancy observed the gallery's reaction as the true human cost became clear. Representatives from patient advocacy groups wept openly. Healthcare professionals who had witnessed their patients' struggles sat in stunned silence. Marcus Davidson, testifying under immunity, revealed how the conspiracy had maintained its secrecy. We established a network of compromised officials across regulatory agencies. Regular payments ensured minimal oversight. When someone like Robert Andrews threatened exposure, protocol silence provided a systematic way to eliminate the threat. The committee's findings led to immediate legislative action. The Andrews-Martinez Financial Accountability Act, named in honor of both the original whistleblowers and the investigation that exposed the truth, introduced unprecedented oversight requirements for institutional investors managing healthcare and retirement funds. During a recess, Special Agent Reynolds shared a profound observation with Nancy. Robert Andrews didn't just document crimes, he provided a roadmap for reform. Every piece of evidence he gathered was structured to support specific regulatory changes. The corporate scandal's exposure triggered a wave of additional investigations. Other financial institutions began internal audits, racing to self-report violations before facing federal scrutiny. The industry-wide reckoning Robert Andrews had envisioned was finally occurring. Back home that evening, Nancy found Maggie watching news coverage of the hearings. They keep talking about Daddy's papers, the child observed, but they don't talk about how he used to read me stories every night, even when he was really tired from fighting the bad guys. Nancy sat beside her daughter, understanding the complexity of legacy. That's because your father did something extraordinary. He found a way to help people he'd never meet while still being a wonderful dad to you. And your mother was just as amazing. She made sure his work would help all those families, even when she knew it was dangerous. The corporate scandal's exposure had vindicated the Andrews sacrifices, but their true victory lay in the changes their evidence had sparked. As Nancy watched Maggie process these events, she recognized that the greatest legacy of Robert and Sarah Andrews wasn't just the corruption they exposed, it was the example they set for their daughter about courage, integrity, and the responsibility to stand up for others. The final phase of justice unfolded in the federal courthouse on a crisp autumn morning. Judge Margaret Pearson presided over the sentencing of the key figures in the Meridian conspiracy. The courtroom was filled with victims' families, media representatives, and members of the financial community. William Preston, former CEO of Meridian Financial, stood before the court as Judge Pearson delivered her verdict. The systematic targeting of vulnerable families represents a betrayal of trust that strikes at the heart of our financial system, she declared. The court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. Marcus Davidson received an 18-year sentence for his role in orchestrating protocol silence. The judge's words were particularly pointed: you transformed a financial crime into a matter of life and death. The blood of Robert and Sarah Andrews stains your conscience. The remaining board members faced sentences ranging from 12 to 20 years. More significantly, the court ordered the complete forfeiture of their personal assets, which would be added to the Victim Restitution Fund. The message was clear: financial crimes against vulnerable families would carry consequences beyond mere regulatory fines. Detective Sullivan, sitting beside Nancy in the gallery, observed the proceedings with professional satisfaction. The sentencing guidelines created by the Andrews-Martinez Act made this possible, he noted quietly. No more comfortable minimum security arrangements for white-collar criminals who destroy lives. As the defendants were led away, Special Agent Reynolds presented the court with the final tally of recovered funds. $4.8 billion would be returned to affected families. The Children's Hospital Pension Fund would be fully restored with additional compensation for delayed medical treatments. Judge Pearson addressed the victims directly. While no sentence can fully repair the damage inflicted on your families, the court hopes that today's judgments provide some measure of closure. Robert and Sarah Andrews paid the ultimate price to expose this corruption. Their sacrifice ensures that future generations will be better protected. Nancy watched Maggie's reaction carefully. The child sat between her and Jacob, displaying the composed demeanor that had become characteristic of her public appearances. When asked by a reporter for her thoughts, Maggie's response displayed wisdom beyond her years. "My first parents couldn't be here to see this," she stated clearly, "but they knew something important. Sometimes justice takes a long time, and lots of brave people working together. My new parents taught me that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about making sure other families don't get hurt the same way." The implementation of the Andrews-Martinez Act brought immediate changes to the financial industry. Compliance officers across the country, emboldened by the outcome of the Meridian case, began stepping forward with evidence of similar schemes. The law's whistleblower protections, combined with mandatory family security provisions, created safe channels for exposing corporate fraud. As they left the courthouse, Nancy, Jacob, and Maggie encountered Barbara Coleman's sister, Janet. She approached them hesitantly, then spoke with evident emotion. "I wanted you to know Barbara completed her testimony against the remaining conspirators today. She said understanding the impact on families like yours helped her find the courage to tell the truth." That evening, at the Andrews graveside, Maggie placed fresh flowers and a copy of the sentencing document. "I think they'd be proud," she said quietly, "not just because the bad people are being punished, but because things are actually changing." Nancy embraced her daughter, recognizing in her words the same commitment to justice that had driven Robert and Sarah. The tragedy that had brought them together had transformed into a legacy of reform, protection, and hope for countless families. 2 years after the Meridian investigation, the Martinez family gathered in their backyard for a celebration that symbolized both closure and new beginnings. The occasion was Maggie's 7th birthday, but it represented something deeper, the first truly carefree family gathering since the case concluded. The yard was transformed with decorations that bridged past and present. Photos of Robert and Sarah Andrews shared space with recent family portraits. Maggie's art projects, no longer dominated by courtroom scenes, displayed the vibrant imagination of a child healing from trauma. Nancy, now director of the Financial Crimes Division, observed the scene with quiet satisfaction. Detective Sullivan arrived with his family, his usual gruff demeanor softened by his daughter's friendship with Maggie. Special Agent Reynolds, who had become a close family friend, presented Maggie with a specially bound copy of the Andrews-Martinez Act, its pages illustrated to help young readers understand its importance. Jacob, recently promoted to head of counseling services at Roosevelt High, had invited several families from his support group for children affected by corporate crimes. These children, once isolated by their experiences, had formed a tight-knit community of understanding and resilience. The most touching moment came when Maggie blew out her candles. "I made 3 wishes," she announced. "One for my first mom and dad in heaven, one for my new mom and dad here, and one for all the families we helped save." Nancy and Jacob exchanged glances, recognizing in their daughter's words the perfect synthesis of remembrance and hope that had guided their journey together. The First Presbyterian Church Community Center became a symbol of collective recovery through its new financial literacy and family protection program. The initiative, born from the Meridian case experience, brought together victims, advocates, and financial professionals committed to preventing future exploitation. Reverend Davidson had transformed the church basement into a resource center where families could access free financial counseling and legal advice. The walls displayed educational materials explaining financial safeguards in clear, accessible language. A prominent section honored Robert and Sarah Andrews' legacy while highlighting successful cases of fraud prevention. Jacob led weekly support group sessions where families shared their experiences and healing strategies. The participants included former Meridian clients, whistleblowers from other institutions, and community members committed to financial accountability. Their discussions helped bridge the social divisions that corporate corruption had created. Nancy regularly participated in educational panels, sharing investigative insights while emphasizing the human element of financial crimes. Her presentations always included practical steps for protecting vulnerable family members, drawing on lessons learned from the Andrews case. The program's success attracted national attention, with other communities requesting guidance on establishing similar initiatives. The model demonstrated how local institutions could play a crucial role in preventing financial exploitation while supporting affected families. During one particularly meaningful session, a retired teacher whose pension had been restored through the investigation expressed the community's transformation. We're no longer victims or witnesses. We're guardians of each other's well-being, just as Robert and Sarah Andrews were guardians of truth. During a routine medical checkup following the program's success, Dr. Patricia Reynolds delivered unexpected news that brought tears to Nancy's eyes. After years of fertility struggles, she was pregnant. The timing seemed to reflect the healing that had taken place in their lives. That evening, Nancy and Jacob decided to share the news with Maggie first, understanding that such changes could be sensitive for an adopted child. They sat together in their favorite spot, the window seat where they had shared so many important conversations. "Maggie, sweetheart," Nancy began carefully, "we've just learned that our family will be growing. How would you feel about becoming a big sister?" Maggie's response reflected the emotional maturity she had developed through their shared experiences. "My first mom wrote in her journal that love grows bigger when you share it," she said thoughtfully. "Is that what's happening to our family?" Jacob drew both of them close. "That's exactly what's happening. And you know what's special? This baby will have the most amazing big sister to teach them about courage and truth." The moment embodied the completion of their journey from tragedy to healing a family built on love, strengthened by adversity, and now expanding with new hope. 1 year after Nancy's pregnancy announcement, the Martinez family dedicated the Robert and Sarah Andrews Memorial Wing at the local children's hospital. The new facility, funded by recovered Meridian assets, specialized in providing long-term care support for families facing extended medical challenges. At the dedication ceremony, Nancy, visibly expecting their second child, stood with Jacob and Maggie before an audience of healthcare professionals, patient families, and community leaders. Their presence embodied the transformation of tragedy into lasting positive change. Today represents more than a building dedication. Nancy addressed the gathering. It represents our community's commitment to protecting our most vulnerable members and ensuring that the sacrifices made by Robert and Sarah Andrews continue to serve future generations. Maggie, now 8, participated in the ribbon-cutting ceremony, while holding her new role with characteristic grace. She had become a symbol of resilience for other children in the hospital's family support program, sharing her story to help them understand that healing comes in many forms. The facility's central feature was a research center dedicated to making advanced medical care more accessible to families regardless of their financial circumstances. A plaque in the main lobby bore the Andrews family motto, which Maggie had discovered in her mother's journals: "Truth protects those who cannot protect themselves." As the family toured the completed facility, Maggie placed her hand on Nancy's growing belly and whispered, "My first parents protected me so I could be here to help protect others. Now we'll all protect the new baby together." The message of legacy and protection. Dear friends, as we reflect on the story of the Andrews family and the Martinez family, it speaks directly to the concerns that keep many of us awake at night: the security of our life savings, the protection of our children and grandchildren's futures, and the legacy we hope to leave behind. Robert and Sarah Andrews could have been any of us hard-working Americans who believed in the system, who trusted financial institutions with their life savings and their dreams for their daughter's future. Their story reminds us of the sacred responsibility we have to protect not just our own families, but all families in our community. Many of you have spent decades building nest eggs for retirement, setting aside funds for grandchildren's education, or maintaining medical savings for life's uncertainties. The Andrews-Martinez Act now stands as a shield protecting these investments, your investments, ensuring that the trust you've placed in financial institutions isn't betrayed. But this story offers something even more valuable than financial security. It shows us that even in our golden years, we can be powerful advocates for change. Robert Andrews didn't just expose fraud, he created a blueprint for reform that will protect generations to come. Sarah Andrews didn't just investigate corruption, she showed her daughter that principles are worth standing up for, no matter the cost. For those of you who worry about the world your grandchildren will inherit, remember that the Martinez family demonstrates how communities can heal and rebuild. Their story proves that it's never too late to stand up for what's right, that family can be formed through shared values as much as shared blood, and that love multiplies when we extend it to others in need. The Andrews-Martinez Financial Accountability Act isn't just legislation, it's our generation's gift to the future, ensuring that the pensions you've earned, the medical savings you've accumulated, and the educational funds you've established for your grandchildren remain secure and protected. Let this story be a reminder that our years of experience and wisdom make us not just witnesses to history, but guardians of our community's future. Like Robert and Sarah Andrews, like Nancy and Jacob Martinez, we too can leave a legacy of protection, integrity, and hope for the generations that follow. Because in the end, our true wealth isn't just measured in dollars and cents, it's measured in the security and values we pass on to those who come after us. With deep respect for your lifetime of wisdom and care. Signature. P.S. If this story has touched you, consider sharing it with your children and grandchildren. Let them know that protecting family legacies isn't just about financial security, it's about standing up for what's right, no matter our age. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.